Well, I joined the club in my second semester freshman year, um, and it was a big club at that point. In the first semester that I joined, I didn't play very much. There was a very large group of guys that were just helping out, and so I didn't start playing until I was a sophomore. I guess the reason I've often told the story. The reason that I enjoyed playing rugby and got so into it was that my brothers and cousins and all were great football players, and I was never a great football player. And it was a sport I could actually get into, and it was my own. And it was at a time when at school there were no fraternities and there were very few social clubs. It was probably the biggest fraternity you could possibly imagine. So it was a great bunch of guys.
Yeah.
At the time, you started playing. I think we had 5 sides at the time. So you started playing on the east side, and you work your way up. By the end of sophomore year and into junior year, it was a pretty tight group of people. The 3 classes, the one our class, the one in front of us, and the one behind us, we were all pretty tight. No, I was a senior when I was the president. I was the match secretary first. In fact, I was a match secretary before I really started playing very much.
Yeah.
My first real assignment was to organize the tour that we had to England and Wales in our junior year.
Why do you think we were able to be so successful in that regard?
Well, I think there were a couple things. First of all, there were no other fall contact sports that we were competing with. There was a club football program that started off maybe in our junior year, and it was a small program. So there really wasn't another. There was no other real fall contact sport. So it was the only thing you could do other than play intramurals. The attraction to a student-run organization like the rugby club was from the very beginning. We learned that rugby was kind of on the outside, and we liked that. There was a certain esprit de corps about being sort of not conventional. The structure, though, was very solid. There was a team of officers that ran the club, and there was a team of captains that actually ran the play in the field. So it was, and you learned. Most everybody, there are a couple of exceptions, but most everybody had never played rugby before they walked onto that field. And as you remember, the field that we played on was unique because it had 2 sewer caps in the middle of it, and the goalposts were about 10 or 15 yards higher than the center line. It was a rolling hill, and it was our home field advantage when we hosted away teams. But it was the most unconventional setup you could possibly think of, and I think it attracted all of us for that quality. But it was unconventional, but it was very organized. When we were juniors, I think we had 90 freshmen show up in the fall for the first day of practice, and organizing 90 freshmen that had never played rugby before, and And we kept, I would say we kept over half of them through the season and on into the next year. Um, uh, you had to sort of really be organized. Having said that, lining the field at on a Saturday morning, 10 minutes before the whistle, going down to the hardware store in Fairfield and buying an extra bag of chalk because you're out of it, not having a ref for the fifth side match and having to flip a coin to see who was going to do it. There was some pretty hairy moments. We were not completely buttoned down. The club had a history of tours. Of course, looking back on the 50 years, I don't think we realized that we were in the first decade of the history of the club. It felt like it was a much more grounded, organized group when we were playing. There had been several tours in the years prior to our trip. Of course, England and Wales are solid rugby country. There had been several trips to the Caribbean, and we decided our class, which was a large class, both in terms of the size of the class and the size of the number of guys who played rugby. Kind of was always trying to one-up the classes ahead of us. So they'd gone to Bermuda and the Caribbean, and so we said, well, we're going to go to Europe. And none of us had ever been to Europe before. We had no idea what we're getting into. So we organized and I think not knowing what we were getting into actually helped, because if we had actually known what we were getting into, it would have scared us away. And because we were a club sport and didn't have the supervision of the athletic department, they didn't really understand what we were doing until after we were doing it, and so they were the oversight was rather lax. I think if they had understood exactly what we're doing, they wouldn't have allowed it to happen either. Because we basically went to, I don't remember how many guys went, but we had at least 2 full sides plus, so maybe 50 or 60 guys went on the trip, and we organized it all ourselves, and no chaperones. There was nobody above the age of 21 on the trip with us. One story, we had a bus and a couple of rent-a-cars, and because we didn't all fit in the bus, and when we actually got to London and we checked in and we got going, we actually all fit into the bus eventually. But one of the cars that we had rented actually disappeared, and I thought it had been stolen. I thought for sure it had been stolen, and I thought this was, we were going to hear from this. And when we got back to London after being in Wales, we realized it had been towed, and the rental company had been looking for us for 2 weeks. But so that was a relief. But and it was from a discipline point of view, there were not a lot of problems. Everybody behaved themselves within reason, and we did pretty well on the field. I think we surprised our opponents.
Well, I remember I was just so impressed with the way they set up their club. It was like the heart of the town or the city. And everything revolved around it for all the different age groups. There was the disco for the teens, and then there was the bar for the players in the middle age, and then they even had the seniors off with their corner singing and all of that. And I'll never forget that whole kind of community feeling you had around rugby.
Well, some of those small towns, that really was the center of activity, and we had never actually experienced anything quite like it either. In the sense that most of the clubs had clubhouses. We barely had a field. We were just in the process of actually having our own field at Fairfield, and but to have a clubhouse and to have a group of adults who actually spent their time overseeing all of the activities of the club, so that the players actually all they did is play. Everything was provided for them, and the as I remembered, it was early spring, so the weather in England and Wales was particularly cold and damp, just like it is now, even more raw. But the ground was really wet and soggy. But the warm ginger beer that they served after a match, shanty, and it was the first time we'd actually ever seen one of these huge, big tubs, no showers, just these big tubs that you
big
just soaked in.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it wasn't health department approved, but it took care of the sore muscles.
Paul was so loved by everyone, and what made him special as a moderator of the club?
Well, he kind of got the unconventional nature of the DNA of the rugby club, and I think he was clearly not a player or even a coach or somebody that really got into the sport, but he was fiercely loyal to the club and defended us to the administration, and was very, very sort of open and supportive of almost anything we wanted to do. And he enjoyed hanging out at the field on Saturday afternoon. He enjoyed the parties.
Right. I believe you went on to keep playing for quite some time.
Yeah, I played at William and Mary, where I went to graduate school. It was actually one of the founding members of that club. It just started the year that I started graduate school, and then after that, when I moved to Washington, I played for the Washington Rugby Club. And then when I moved to New York, I started playing for the New York Athletic Club. And I played rugby. I don't officially say I've retired, but I haven't played a game in about 5 years. There's a group called the Gentlemen of New York that plays occasionally, and that's the last game that I played, and it was about 5 years ago, and that's mostly over 50s guys. So my experience with rugby, both at Fairfield, it certainly started at Fairfield, but in all of the clubs that I played, it was the first thing that I did when I got to a new town or a new place, and it immediately grounded me in the community. It gave me an instant group of friends and an instant connection. And in most cases, both at William and Mary and in Washington, and then again in New York, because I had played most of the teams before actually getting to the new city, I knew people, and it just was a very easy way to adjust to a new job, new city, new location, and you have a connection. Right. Well, I think the college experience in general, including all of your extracurricular activities, prepares you for what you do in the future. I think I probably was drawn to organization, and I think working with Fairfield Rugby, one of the things you learn is that you can control only so many things, and you kind of have to go with the flow. and you work as a team. And so those things really were quite powerful, and have been consistent through my life. The job I have now is that I call it actually herding cats, and certainly the experience in Fairfield on the rugby team was we were definitely herding cats. I would just say two things. I sort of alluded to it earlier. The fact that we were early on in the history of the club was the fact that we were not, at least I was not conscious of. It felt like a very organized, it felt like it had been around forever. The guys that had run the club prior to us, the people that were running the club when we joined, were very well organized. We're very committed. During our time at the club, we had the donation of the field, the Growart Field. It was because of the size of the club, because of the guys that were managing it. It probably was the most important student organization at the university at a time when the world situation was pretty chaotic, and Fairfield was no exception to that. The rugby club was a fairly solid organization run by pretty solid guys. I would say that our experience, and I'll defer to my colleagues, but our experience in our class, we were a pretty tight group. We shared houses at the beach. We lived together. We played rugby together. We went to school together. We summered together, and for the most part have stayed very close 40, 45 years later. So the connections we had both at Fairfield and in what is now a long time since then have only gotten stronger over the years. And I don't think we realized how deep and lasting those relationships were going to be when we were making them. But it was a pretty powerful influence, both in our academic time, but also in our lives in general.
Right.